to need. Once I thought that these ends could be attained under capitalism, means of production privately owned, and I used in accord with free individual initiative. After earnest observation, I now believe that private ownership of capital and free enterprise are leading the world to disaster. I do not believe that the so-called people's capitalism has in the United States or anywhere replaced the ills of private capitalism and shown an answer to socialism. The corporation is but the legal mask behind which the individual owner of wealth hides. Democratic government in the United States has almost ceased to function. A fourth of the adults are disenfranchised. Half the legal voters do not go to the polls. We are ruled by those who control wealth and who by that power buy or coerce public opinion. I resent the charge that communism is a conspiracy. Communists often conspire, as do capitalists. But it is false that all communists are criminals and that communism speaks and exists mainly by means of force and fraud. I shall therefore hereafter help the triumph of communism in every honest way that I can, without deceit or hurt, and in any way possible, without war and with goodwill to all men of all colors, classes, and creeds. If because of this belief and such action I become the victim of attack and calumny, I will react in the way that seems to me best for the world in which I live and which I have tried earnestly to serve. I know well that the triumph of communism will be a slow, difficult task involving mistakes of every sort. It will call for progressive change in human nature and a better type of manhood and womanhood than is common today. I believe this possible, or otherwise we will continue to lie, steal, and kill as we are doing today. Who now am I to have come to these conclusions? And of what, if any, significance are my deductions? What has been my life and work, and what meaning to mankind? The final answer to these questions, time and posterity must make. But perhaps it is my duty to contribute whatever enlightenment I can. This is the excuse for this writing, which I call a soliloquy. Thank you very much.
Now, y'all know the rules. 215-634-8065. Don't call me talking about the weather. Don't call talking about what we having to eat at the 15th anniversary Kimmel Center celebration. Right now, we are talking about the year of Du Bois, Dr. Anthony Montero. 215-634-8065. 215-634-8065. Now is your time to call in. And we were talking earlier about some solutions. Yeah. Brett Kavanaugh, Bill Cosby, if you want to relate that in any way to what we're talking about today, that'd be great as we get these callers.
Yeah, well, Brett Kavanaugh and Bill Cosby, I think they are bound at the hip in a certain way. But I think the larger question is what is going on with the society in general. It is, I think, probably one of the darkest times in the history of our country. A crisis at the level of the economy. People are not doing as well as the government statistics would suggest. Poverty is all around us, of course. But then there is a moral crisis. What is right and what is wrong? What will be the relationships between men and women? How should these relationships be conducted? And in a bigger sense, are we not looking at a crisis of our civilization? That's the way I would connect them. And I think Du Bois, as a prophetic figure, allowed us to think about the present in terms of what the future could be. If we just think about the present crisis without seeing it from the standpoint of what a future might be, I think we will not ever be able to come up with the type of solutions that are necessary.
Now, what do you suggest in terms of reading that could give people deeper insights into some of the stuff we've been discussing today?
Well, I was just reading from a section of his final autobiography. It's called the Autobiography of W.E.B. Du Bois, which was published after his death, but he had done most of the writing already. I would think that would be a good starting point if people are interested. I think, as I read last week from the book Dusk of Dawn, which was his second autobiography, where he there talked about how he felt that private ownership of production and profit for a few at the expense of the many was at the foundation of the economic malaise that this society faces, and he felt that ultimately humanity would have to transition to a new type of economy. Of course, it's very interesting that in the period that Du Bois is thinking in the ways that I'm talking about today, he also came under attack by the United States government. And he was called an agent of a foreign government and other things. Of course, at that time, he responded to the government by saying he's not an agent of any government. He's an agent of peace. He was, and this was, of course, the McCarthyite period, the period where certain thoughts and ideas could not be mentioned. If you did mention them, you were seen as a criminal, as a person who might go to jail. And of course, Du Bois was indicted by the government because of his activism for peace. So that whole period of his life, I think it would be very important to look at, and the way to look at that period, I think, is through his autobiography. And this final one, I think, is very valuable in that respect.
In terms of the feminist writings, people talk about Douglass and people talk about Du Bois most often. What are some of the works that Du Bois speaks to women's issues or women's concerns in politics that people could look into?
It's a good question. Du Bois talked about women and black women throughout his life and all of his writings, and I think I read some of them. We can start with The Souls of Black Folk and the chapter called Of the Meaning of Progress, where he talks about this outstanding woman, a peasant woman, who he defined as a moral hero, Josie. But I think maybe the high point in many ways of his writings on women is the 1920 essay entitled The Damnation of Women, where he talks about the special history of the African woman, and he comes up with an idea where he calls which he calls the African mother idea, saying that motherhood itself is an African invention. So those are very important writings, I think. And I guess the last thing would be the novel called The Dark Princess.
215-634-8065, 215-634-8065. And in terms of Du Bois's life with women, a lot of people talk about his own life and don't know too much. He shares some of the insights about his family and his relationships and things like that as well, because most times people only talk about his work and don't necessarily talk about the man that he was.
Yeah. Well, he was raised by his mother. He lived very close to his mother. He was always around his mother. He lost his mother when he was 16 years old. And Du Bois is a product of two trends within the diaspora. His father was Haitian. His mother was from a darker group of Africans. They lived in Western Massachusetts. But his father kind of left the family soon after Du Bois was born, and Du Bois was then raised by his mother. His mother dies again when he was 16. So he's one of those young men who was motherless, but he always respected women. He marries soon after he graduates from Harvard with his PhD, and he's married for 55 years to Nina Gomer Du Bois. She dies in the late 40s and early 50s, I should say, and soon after he marries his second wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois. And the interesting thing about that marriage is that her son, David Graham Du Bois, he took on Du Bois's last name soon after his mother and Du Bois were married. That son becomes the editor of the Black Panther newspaper and would go on to live in Ghana and then Egypt. But Du Bois has this very, I consider it a heroic life. He always was that kind of quintessential intellectual who stood for ideas whether they were popular or not, because his commitment was to the truth. And he is therefore the example, not only in the early part of his life, but I think more than anything at the end of his life, where he continued to grow, continued to stand up, and continued to be that type of political and radical intellectual who is in all regards the example, quintessential example of the black radical tradition.
Now, you can call up 215-634-8065, 215-634-8065. We are in studio with Dr. Anthony Montero here in Du Bois. It is Kuwaisa, super producer, JB, Young Phenom on the boards, yours truly, the rapping professor, and we thank you for waking up with Word, y'all.
Word Radio is celebrating 15 years as the voice of the community, and we want you in the building. Join us Saturday, October 6th at the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts for our 15th anniversary celebration. The celebration kicks off with a special Sankofa Awards reception beginning at 5:30 p.m., featuring special musical performances by folk, blues, and R&B singer Toshi Reagan. Then at 8, a unique intergenerational conversation among 3 celebrated author activists, D. Ray McKesson, Sonia Sanchez, and Mark Lamont Hill, moderated by Word President and CEO Sarah Lomax Reese. Immediately following the panel discussion is the official Word Backstage After Party with food, drinks, a live DJ, and dancing. Hosted by the Rapping Professor, Dr. Aaron Smith. Space is very limited, so RSVP right now. Admission is just $75 for 4-Word members and $150 for non-members, which includes your 4-Word membership. It's Word Radio's 15-year anniversary celebration. Saturday, October 6th at the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts, 300 South Broad Street. To reserve your spot or for additional information, visit wordradio.com or call 215-425-7875. Presented by Independence Blue Cross, sponsored by Comcast NBC Universal and PICO, and supported by Thomas Jefferson University and Jefferson Health, the Lenfest Institute, Penn Health and University of Penn, Brown ShopRite, Dietz & Watson, Hers, Amoroso's, and Canada Dry.
Since 1904, Philly's top sandwich pros and homemakers have always started the exact same way, with those legendary Amoroso's rolls baked fresh daily. Word family, put Amoroso's rolls on your shopping list for your kids' school lunches and your next family gathering. And don't forget your Eagles tailgate. Want to make your very best sandwiches? Always start with the very best sandwich rolls. Pick them up today at your favorite supermarket or food store. Amoroso's, why Philly's sandwiches are world famous.
St. Ignatius Nursing and Rehab Center invites you to a Health and Resource Festival Saturday, September 29th from 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. located 4400 Haverford Avenue. For health screenings, food, activities, entertainment, and more. Call 215-349-8800.
At Dietz & Watson, the first thing we ever made were Frankfurters. Our New York-style natural casing beef franks have that authentic New York-style snap to them, along with our very own blend of all-natural spices and seasoning. We've spent a lifetime focusing on the details, because to us, the details make all the difference. Dietz & Watson, caring like only family can since 1939.
Wake Up with Word on Word Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD, Independent Black Media.
Independent Black Media, 900 AM, 96.1 FM, WURD, WURDradio.com. Listen live anytime and log on. If you don't have that app, you know where to go. Download an app like you know on the road to October 6th. Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. We are going to have a good time. It's going to be amazing. Conversation, Sankofa Awards Boys in the After Party. DJ A-List and yours truly. Don't miss that conversation at 8 p.m. Sonia Sanchez, Mark Lamont Hill, DeRay McKesson, hosted and moderated by CEO and President of WRD, Sarah Lomax Reese, and we are going to have a great event. You get your membership for the year as well as your access, and this is an event you do not want to miss. Again, October 6th is the anniversary. November 6th is the votiversary. We are currently discussing the year in Du Bois with Dr. Anthony Montero. One of the questions that I had is, why, in your opinion, do you think Du Bois turned to communism as opposed to other ideologies, especially, in terms of being black in America at that time?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. Professor Smith, during the break, I was discussing with Kawesa and the young phenom and yourself, one of the things is, what does the world look like to the millennial generation? What does the world look like? How do they think about the future? Or do they see a future? And, I'm of course older than all of you all. And, I was a student at Lincoln University, back in the 60s and 70s. And Lincoln at that time, half of the student body were from Africa. And, half of the Africans were from the yet unliberated parts of Southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, Zimbabwe. And so I came up in a context intellectually and academically of African Americans and African students all thinking about the freedom struggle, the anti-colonial struggle, the struggle of black people in the South, and then, of course, the urban uprisings. And then at Lincoln, if you don't mind me just going through...
No, tell about it.
Yeah. At Lincoln, we were always mindful that the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, had graduated from Lincoln, and that the first president of Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe, had also graduated from Lincoln, and that Thurgood Marshall had graduated from Lincoln, and Langston Hughes, the poet laureate of black people, had graduated from Lincoln. So we're influenced as young people by all of this, and we had this optimism that the world could be changed, that black folk could be free. And then, even though Du Bois was not talked about a lot at Lincoln then because of McCarthyism and the Cold War, and because, as you asked, he had declared himself in favor of socialism. And for many, that was a bad word. What brought him there? And I think I could answer that by saying, again, the first part of his life, he was looking at the color line, the white supremacist social system. The second part of his life, he's looking at two systems together, capitalism and the white supremacist social system. And he asked himself, like you asked today, what is the answer? I mean, do we as Africans stay locked in this vortex of these two oppressive systems, or do we look for a way out? And to your question, he saw the way out in a planned economy, an economy that served people rather than individual profit, a economy and society for all of its people rather than for, as we call them today, the 1%. So I think that's what brought him to it.
The 1%. Still alive and well and kicking. Now, in terms of, contemporary scholars, and you said the younger generation, are there some people, like the younger public intellectuals, are there some people that seem to be carrying on this Du Boisian tradition in these young people that we see on TV and everything today?
Well, I think there are young people carrying on that tradition. I don't think we see them on TV. I don't think we see them very much in universities, but they're there. I have a friend who now teaches at Lincoln University, and I'm always querying her about how are the students. Now, I have to say, I know Kawesa went to Hampton. It is very different being at a historically black college. and certainly at Lincoln with all of those traditions that I spoke about. And what I've gathered from her is that the students there are very, very serious about learning and very serious about thinking outside of the given paradigms or outside of the box that we're supposed to think in. So on one side, I think I feel hopeful, but on the other side, I just don't know. Maybe you know better than me, Professor Smith, or maybe Kawesa could answer that question. What is going on with the younger generation? Are they hopeful? Are they pessimistic? Do they see a future? Or what is the situation?
We have some callers on the line. We're going to start with B from Delaware. Thank you for waking up with Word, B.
Good morning, Professor, Dr. Montero, Queen, and young Simon. Would you not think after the sneering at the UN that number 45 got yesterday and the young people who now call themselves socialist Democrats, it is as though our young people are saying to us, we need another way. And we are responding to them in an extraordinarily positive fashion to say, yes, we understand that this ism, capitalism, is not the system under which we need to operate for the progress of all people. But did not the world, in sneering at 45 yesterday, say that this ism, capitalism, is not working? In Dr. Du Bois's day, it was capitalism, but today, is it not our attempt to redefine some better ism that has a collective goal more important?
Wow, that's very interesting, be your interpretation. I looked at that speech and listened carefully to it, and I think your interpretation is very interesting, that in laughing at him, they were really laughing at American capitalism, because that is what he was celebrating in that first part of his speech, and that's when the laughter broke out. I think that's very interesting, because in a lot of ways the world is moving in a direction opposite to what Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump, but the 1%, as we call them, are moving in this country. That's an interesting thing. And I think for young people, we are really, because, again, you take the polling data that says that over 50% of millennials favor socialism or planned economy over private capitalism. We don't see that actualized a lot. Maybe you could say with Gillum, the brother that's running for the governor of Florida, and he seems to have a significant lead in that race. He identifies himself as a socialist. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a socialist. Ayanna Pressley in Boston, again, a socialist. Something is going on. We just don't quite know how it will crystallize or manifest itself in political action and mass movements going forward. I think, if I could just, I know Professor Smith asked, well, why did I think Du Bois identified himself with communism at the end of his life? I think a big part of it was that he saw capitalism as being responsible for perpetual war, and that the only way to break the cycle of endless war was to break the cycle of capitalist private profit and the search for cheaper and cheaper labor and cheaper resources throughout the world.
Yeah, and the exploitation of the people.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're there.
I think you might be right, but I'm not quite certain. I'm a social scientist, and I'm always looking for concrete evidence, be it, that statistical evidence or the evidence that you get from talking to people. That's why I was, during the break, I was so interested in hearing what Kawesa and Professor Smith and the young phenom had to say, and I could say, as I asked them, Kawesa had a whimsical look on her face, as though to say, I don't know where all of this is leading. Yes. So thank you, B. I really love talking to you.
Thank you so much, B, for calling up and waking up with Word this morning. Lulu, thank you for calling and waking up with Word.
Good morning, Professor and Word family. I'm just a little skeptic about everybody talking communism right now. A house divided will not stand. All these people in the past, like talking about going and even going to Africa, all that, I could understand it at that time and all. But everyone who had money and who was prestige and had opportunities to go, I didn't see them leave. And even today, you see all the people with wealth and the 1%, whatever. They may have their money and other accounts across the world, but I don't see them leaving America either. So this is what I want to understand. We're here in this country. If we allow other people to come here and influence us, we're going to be on the bottom line. We got our rights here. We can stand up and fight for our rights and that's that. We don't have to cower out now. We're going to stay here and fight and do what we got to do and get ours like every other nationality, excluding the Indians. It's our time. Either we do or we die. Thank you and enjoy your day.
Well, let me tell you, I agree with you that this is where our fight is. But the question is, how do we fight? And I think you might be familiar with that saying, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. What is the spirit of this time? And what are the powerful ideas that will drive history forward in this time? And that's what we're talking about. And I'm not, for one, and I don't think Du Bois was advocating a mass migration back to Africa, although he lived the last couple of his years in Ghana, in West Africa, and he had gone to Ghana at the invitation of the president of that nation, Kwame Nkrumah, to start again work on a project that he began in 1909 called the Encyclopedia of Africa. But indeed, you are right. Our struggle is here. But I think if you are suggesting that ideas of socialism or a planned economy or an economy for the people is somehow a foreign idea, I think you make a mistake. I think the idea of private profit and the capitalist economy is a foreign idea if you take the position, which is historically correct, that the original people here were Native Americans, and their economy was a communal economy. We were brought here in chains, but the economy and social life that we left behind was a communal form of economic and social life. So I don't think when we talk about these ideas that we're really talking about foreign ideas. We're talking about solutions to modern crises and problems.
And there you have it here in Du Bois, Dr. Anthony Montero. Thank you all for calling in. As usual, you make this show what it is. And I hope you had an amazing morning and hope you have decided to make it a lovely day. Make sure that you got your passes, your access for October 6th at the Kimmel Center. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch Nappily Ever After with Sanaa Lathan, talks about natural hair on Netflix. It's a great, brilliant film and just a refreshing departure from what we're used to seeing, in the popular media. So, Nappily Ever After, Sanaa Lathan on Netflix now. Check that out when you get a chance. Up next, The Source.